How does a nation with like a rapidly shrinking youth population, a skyrocketing base of retirees, and a really heavily burdened welfare state manage to grow its wealth to over $3.7 trillion,
Right.
while at the exact same time slashing its carbon emissions by nearly 30%? I mean, you've handed us an incredibly dense, data-heavy presentation today, and our mission in this deep dive is to open the hood on the socioeconomic engine of France to answer that exact question.
Yeah, it's a massive topic.
It really is. We are looking at this comprehensive analytical deck you sent over titled France's Socioeconomic and Sustainable Development Evolution, 1960 to 2024. And it's just backed by a mountain of raw macroeconomic, demographic, and environmental data from the World Bank.
And what's interesting is how it's presented, right?
Okay, let's unpack this, because the designer of these slides had some super strict visual instructions. Like, we're talking a pure FFFFF, absolute white background.
Yeah, no distractions at all.
Zero. Muted Morandi colors, flat design everywhere. They completely banned any flashy 3D graphics. This is a serious data-driven report meant to be read independently, but, we're here to bring these numbers to life for you.
Exactly. And looking at these raw metrics, I mean, everything from gross national income to methane emissions to tertiary education enrollment, it provides this profound X-ray of a modern European powerhouse.
Yeah.
They are navigating massive global shifts. What's fascinating here is how the presentation forces us to look past all the usual political narratives and focus purely on what the hard data says about their resilience and, well, their vulnerabilities.
So true. So let's jump right into slide 2, which sets the macro foundation. There's this flat, deep blue line chart tracking gross national income, or GNI, per capita over the long term.
Right, the current dollar GNI.
Yeah, and the data shows GNI purchasing power parity climbing steadily to over $55,000, with the total GNI PPP surpassing 3.7 trillion current international dollars. But there's a specific visual cue here.
The arrow, yeah.
Exactly. There's an arrow pointing to the pre-2008 financial crisis peak, and then the designer used this dashed circle to show the steady stabilization over the last decade. It's not this wild rocket ship.
No, it's methodical, and that dashed circle proves extreme macroeconomic resilience. I mean, despite global shocks like 2008 or the Eurozone debt crisis, the baseline wealth of the nation repairs itself. It stabilizes.
But wealth generation doesn't just happen in a vacuum, right? It depends entirely on the people generating it.
Which brings us perfectly to slide 3, the demographics.
Yeah, this one is a stacked area chart. And it's got this prominent gray circle highlighting what the slide calls the aging scissors intersection.
The demographic scissors, right?
It's wild. The data shows the 65 and older population just climbing dramatically.
Yeah.
Like, females 65 and older grew from 3.4 million historically to over 8.5 million in this data.
Wow.
That demographic alone has broken past 21% of the total population.
Right, and while that's happening, look at the base.
Yeah, the 0 to 14 youth demographic is actively shrinking. Male youth drop below 6 million. The lines literally cross.
And that crossing, that structural reversal of the youth dependency ratio versus the elderly dependency ratio, is the ultimate lens here. You have to view all of France's pension policies, their healthcare spending, and their labor market through this exact lens.
So what does this all mean for the economy? I mean, if we think of it like a train, right? The youth and working age folks are the engine.
Sure, yeah.
And that engine is shrinking. Meanwhile, the passenger car, the retirees, is getting heavier. How does the train keep moving at the same speed, or even grow to 3.7 trillion?
It requires immense efficiency. If you have fewer workers, each worker has to produce significantly more value. You need a massive upgrade in technological and educational advancement.
Which leads us to how they actually power this super efficient economy. The energy structure on slide 4 is, well, it's an anomaly.
Total global anomaly.
There's this 100% stacked bar chart showing their energy mix over time. And electricity production from nuclear sources just dominates, sitting at around 70 to 74%.
It's their baseload.
Right. And there's a gray emphasis arrow showing fossil fuel electricity generation dropping way down to the 7 to 10% range. Meanwhile, renewable electricity output steadily climbs from 13% to over 24%.
And if you flip to slide 5, you see the environmental payoff of that exact energy mix. Total greenhouse gas emissions plummeted.
Yeah, the data there is striking.
Methane emissions from waste dropped from 16.5 to 14.1 million tons of CO2 equivalent. Carbon dioxide from industrial processes dropped significantly. There's a downward arrow highlighting a massive negative 28.7% change from 1990 levels in total GHG.
It's nearly a 30% drop, while the economy grew to $3.7 trillion.
Exactly. This is absolute decoupling. Most industrialized nations might see emissions grow slower than GDP. That's relative decoupling. But France actually grew its economy while physically shrinking its absolute carbon footprint.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I look at this nuclear strategy like a financial trust fund.
How so?
Well, the previous generation endured all the upfront costs to build these reactors decades ago. And now, today's economy gets to live off the dividends. It pays massive carbon-free dividends that allow them to integrate wind and solar without falling back on coal when the weather changes.
That's a great analogy. The nuclear baseload provides the energy independence they need to make the renewables work.
But energy is just the physical infrastructure. To keep the economy growing with that shrinking workforce we talked about, you need highly upgraded human infrastructure.
Which is exactly what slides 6, 7, and 8 map out. The human capital engine.
Let's look at slide 6, the basic education slide. It uses this tornado chart comparing boys on the left and girls on the right.
Right, the dual bar chart.
Yeah, and the data shows net enrollment for both primary and secondary education sitting consistently in the high 90s, like 97 to 99%. And there's a vertical alignment line right down the middle showing the gender parity index is pinned exactly at 1.0.
Which means total democratization of foundational skills. Basic education is perfectly equal and universally accessed.
But basic education alone doesn't build a $3.7 trillion service economy.
No, it doesn't. You have to look at slide 7 for that, the tertiary education area chart.
Oh, man, there is a steep upward arrow on this curve. Gross enrollment in tertiary education just surged from roughly 50% to over 71%.
This is the massification of higher education. They're creating a deep reservoir of advanced talent. And then slide 8 brings in the innovation driver.
The R&D data.
Yeah. There's a horizontal line drawn right at the 2.1 to 2.2% mark. That's their R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP.
That's a huge investment.
It is, and it's paired with a soaring density of researchers, over 4,700 per million people. The human capital index sits strongly at 0.76.
So it's a deliberate policy cascade.
Exactly. Basic education ensures the fundamental skills. The massification of higher education creates the advanced talent pool. And the R&D spending ensures those smart people have laboratories and industries to invent the future in.
It ties right back to slide 3, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The aging population.
Spot on. How do you survive an aging population? You make sure every single young person entering the workforce is highly educated and extremely productive.
But let me ask you this. Does pushing over 70% of the population into higher education devalue the degree? Or is it just an absolute necessity for a modern service economy?
Well, based on the data, it seems to be a strict requirement to avoid the unemployment trap.
Which leads us directly to the really harsh reality on slide 9. The picture isn't entirely perfect here.
Far from it.
Looking at the labor market by education slide, the designer used this stark dumbbell chart. And it shows a massive double-digit unemployment gap.
The structural gap.
Yeah. There's a double-sided arrow showing that people with only basic education face 14 to 17% unemployment. Meanwhile, those with advanced education sit safely down at 5 to 6%.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the exact same economic upgrading that demands high tertiary enrollment inherently squeezes out low-skilled labor. The traditional manufacturing jobs are gone, so there is a profound structural mismatch for that bottom 30%.
And that's not the only hidden gap. Slide 10 looks at gender part-time work. It's this visual waffle chart.
And this data is pretty striking.
It is. There's a glaring red warning circle around the female data. Over 35% of women work part-time compared to less than 15% of men. And the female share of middle and senior management just hovers stubbornly around 38%.
Right. And maintaining strict impartiality here, looking only at what the sources tell us, while basic education achieved absolute gender parity at 1.0, the labor market output does not reflect that.
Why the disconnect?
The sources explicitly attribute this to the unequal distribution of unpaid domestic care and family responsibilities. That burden forces a huge chunk of women into part-time roles and directly keeps them out of senior management.
I see this as the glass floor and the sticky door.
Mm-hmm.
While the corporate ceiling might be cracking a bit, the domestic reality keeps a third of women tethered to part-time work. That is a massive, unutilized economic potential for the country.
It is a huge structural inefficiency.
So if you have structural unemployment for the low-skilled and widespread underemployment for women and an aging population, How does the country prevent a total social crisis?
Enter the safety net. You have to look at the social contract on slide 11.
Ah, the social protection slide. It's a massive waterfall chart breaking down government final consumption expenditure.
And those solid arrows point to historically high levels of public spending and fiscal transfers.
They are spending a fortune.
Yeah.
But then you juxtapose that with slide 12, income inequality. It's this flat, visually boring, but honestly beautiful line chart. The Gini coefficient is locked in a super tight, stable band of 31 to 33. There's a horizontal reference line proving it. The poorest 20% and the richest 10% have maintained a really stable balance.
From a purely functional standpoint, this high welfare, high transfer model successfully absorbs the shocks of the economic cycles. It absorbs that 14 to 17% low-skill unemployment rate. It literally buys social cohesion.
But there's a catch, right?
A big one. The sources note the explicit trade-off. This highly inclusive safety net prevents extreme poverty, yes, but it puts an immense persistent deficit pressure on the national treasury.
It's like a shock absorber on a luxury car.
Yeah.
The high welfare spending makes the ride incredibly smooth for the passengers, hence the low inequality and the flat Gini line.
Sure.
But the suspension system itself, the state budget, is under constant heavy strain. It's taking all the hits.
Exactly. And to fund that massive suspension system, you need a high-margin economic engine, which brings us to how they future-proof the economy on slides 13 and 14.
Digitalization and global reach. Slide 13 shows their digital infrastructure. The data is a filled line chart with a massive, steep curve. There's an arrow showing internet usage rocketing from the single digits in the late 90s to nearly 90% today.
The physical laying of broadband cables is effectively complete. The internet has shifted from a luxury to a fundamental utility, like water.
And that digital bedrock allows for what we see on slide 14, international trade. There's a complex Sankey diagram highlighting service trade. It's circled, showing it steadily rising about 20% of GDP.
Right, with ICT exports, information and communication technology, and high-tech manufacturing taking the absolute lead.
So the full pivot.
Complete structural transition. They moved from a traditional heavy manufacturing hub to a knowledge and service-led economy deeply embedded in global value chains. They export high-value services, finance, advanced engineering, software globally.
If you, the listener, are wondering how a country with a shrinking young workforce stays globally relevant, this is it. You digitize everything and you export ideas and high-tech services rather than heavy goods.
It's the only mathematical way to fund the welfare state.
Which brings us to the final slide, slide 15, the conclusion and outlook. The designer styled this as a flat gray, white, and blue, 4-quadrant matrix, kind of an academic SWOT analysis. Let's synthesize this deep dive.
Let's do it.
The advantages, or the stable base, are clear. They have this incredible decarbonization achievement powered by the nuclear and renewable mix. And they have massively educated human capital.
But the challenges, the bottlenecks in the other quadrants are severe. You have the crushing fiscal weight of an aging population. You have the high unemployment for the undereducated. And you have the hidden quality of job gaps for women.
So what's the outlook?
The sources define it as the required new equilibrium. France must find a way to maintain its legendary social cohesion while making the labor market flexible enough to unlock women's full-time potential. And they have to aggressively retrain those facing technological unemployment through lifelong learning.
It's a massive balancing act. And, looking at all this data, it leaves me with one final thought to chew on.
What's that?
We saw that France has successfully decoupled economic growth from carbon emissions through nuclear power.
Yeah, absolute decoupling.
And they've decoupled social stability from raw capitalism through this massive welfare state. But as the population continues to age, will they eventually have to decouple the very idea of retirement from a specific biological age?
Oh, wow, that's a huge question.
Right. If you have a highly educated population living longer and healthier than ever in a service economy where you aren't doing heavy manual labor, perhaps the next great evolution isn't about figuring out how to fund the 65-year-olds.
Right.
Perhaps it's entirely redefining what the 65 to 80-year-old demographic actually does in society.
That is exactly the kind of structural rethink the data demands.
Well, thank you to the listener for bringing such rich source material to the table. It's been an absolute privilege to decode these vital signs with you. Keep digging into the numbers, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.